setting aside the issue of immigration and however legitimate the Pope's concerns may be, I guess one concern that I have is he addresses this issue specifically and very, very forcefully speaks out against some things that J.D. Vance has been promoting, and of course Trump's policies. Again, let's just assume all that is completely legitimate, and you've made a pretty good case that it is. My concern is that, well, he addresses that, but didn't really seem to address the issues that we saw with Biden and Pelosi. Even in the case with Pelosi, I mean, her bishop basically said she can't receive communion.
Right.
She goes to Rome, and Rome gives her communion. And then the Pope basically, in a very indirect way, criticized, I mean, he wasn't very explicit by name, but he did criticize the bishop for that move that he made. And it really seemed to undermine the local bishop's authority. So it seems that he tends to be pretty selective in some cases in things that he wants to address. And I think that's caused a lot of people to be very, very concerned and even offended. It's like, why are you intervening in this issue but not other issues like abortion policies and stuff like that? Even though he's spoken out against abortion,
Of course.
there's more he could have done to address that issue with Biden and Pelosi and others. Can you maybe speak to this?
Okay, so first of all, I don't have any insider knowledge for like any. I don't know anybody who knows anything about this. So like everything I'm about to say. There's a healthy dose of conjecture in everything I'm about to say. But I believe that the Pope, whose English is not very good, his only access to what's going on in the United States is coming through people that he communicates with, and that I think that he's probably being led to his conclusions and led to the the urgency that he needs to act, led to that belief by a number of people who are either in the United States and very partisan, or maybe people who are in Europe who don't understand America very well. So I think I don't want to say I just give the Pope a pass, that way or whatever, but it seems to me like if I just try to put myself in the Pope's shoes. And I say, how would I know what in the world is going on in the United States? Well, I'd probably try to buddy up with a couple of cardinals that might be from the United States, and I'm just going to have to trust what they tell me is true and the right take on it. And in fact, I'm probably just going to tell these guys, if I really trust these guys, I'm probably going to say, hey, whatever your take is, I'll back you on it. In fact, why don't you write this letter to the American bishops, and I'll put my name on it, I imagine that those kinds of things happen. And so I think if you're, to really critique the Pope's relationship with the United States, you got to also recognize he's also from Argentina, and a lot of Latin America has some strong feelings about the United States as well, and feels like maybe the United States is on top at the expense of a lot of Latin American countries. And that's just sort of like a narrative that a lot of Latin Americans have about the United States. The United States is thriving, we're not thriving, and it's the United States' fault, right? If you grow up hearing that all the time, and then you've got an American cardinal who might be telling you something that just reinforces that narrative. It would be very clear to me that if those voices are all politically aligned a certain way, that it might be easy as the Pope to sort of just slip into the same sort of paradigm, whenever you look at the world. And so I would bet that if you were to line everything out in a perfectly, and then you were to present it to the Pope, which I think at least some people probably have. When I read what he writes every time this letter, for example, to the American bishops, shows there's a couple little lines in there that you're like, oh, here's a guy who he does recognize that borders are important. He does recognize that there are some things where you can see he's got some nuance to what he's trying to say. But the thrust of what he's saying feels like it goes.
The emphasis.
The emphasis feels like it goes, to put it in political terms, it goes easier on the Democrats than he does on the Republicans. He seems to go easier on them. Well, I mean, who's he listening to? I don't know, but it seems like he's probably listening to people who are politically aligned a certain way, or who are at least trying to be in a good relationship with politicians in a certain party, and less, feel like there's less hope getting on, Donald Trump's good side or J.D. Vance's good side. So why even try, So there may have been, some of this might have been an attempt to work things out with a different administration, These are all just some thoughts. I don't have any insider information. That's what I think is happening, from what I can gather.
Well, that's helpful in putting it into perspective. It's going to cause a lot of resentment for people, though, regardless of his intentions and motivations.
Yeah.
I think some people are just going to feel like, okay, he's just targeting certain groups and giving a pass to others.
I'll tell you this: the Pope does not seem to be too worried about being resented.
Yeah, I can tell.
He doesn't seem too worried. He does. I will say this: he does seem worried that the Catholic Church might be resented. Right? So he doesn't want people to think the church is mean, right? He doesn't want people to think that the Catholic Church is closed off, he doesn't want people to think the church is that way. But for he himself, he seems to be pretty. I think the kids call this based. The Pope just doesn't seem to care if a politician doesn't like him or if a theologian doesn't like him or whatever. He just kind of doesn't seem to care. And whether or not that's a good strategy, I don't know. Whether or not he's just, I couldn't tell you. But that doesn't seem to be a concern.
I'm talking about the average, Catholic. I don't know. Maybe the average Catholic loves Pope Francis. I don't know. But I do see a lot of people holding a lot of resentment. Sometimes because of misplaced judgments that they've made about Pope Francis based on misinformation. And sometimes because they have some legitimate concerns. Either way, you would hope that he would want to address those issues with people holding resentment against him, whether it's just or, whether it's based on legitimate criticisms or not.
Maybe so. Maybe so. Maybe if to put it in a different way, maybe he takes this, and this is maybe, right? Maybe he just takes this as I don't need to be a popular pope with every American. I don't need to be a popular pope. I need to be a pope who's history is going to judge me on whether or not I spoke out against a great tragedy. And is Nancy Pelosi receiving communion a great tragedy in the same way that what he might think is a giant mass deportation a great tragedy. And the truth is, at least today, and we're speaking about this in mid-February of 2025, it looks like the policies for deportation are very close to what the policies were under Obama, right?
Yes.
That Trump, at least in terms of the execution of it, Trump is about on pace with where Obama was. But people didn't say this under Obama.
Right.
People didn't feel like it was people weren't afraid of it
now.
They're saying it now.
Which is why people feel like, okay, this is targeting.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt about it. I think that the conversation is infused with some political agendas and some political one-upsmanship and political, sort of framing of things that make it seem like, these guys are always wrong, these guys are always right, and let's be patient with these guys, but not with those guys. And I would bet that the Pope is not immune to those kinds of framings, especially if if he's being fed his information. Through whether or not he's reading like the Spanish version of Newsweek, or whether or not he's talking to a cardinal who speaks Spanish very well, or whether or not he's who he's close to, or whatever. The world is messed up, man. The world is messed up. It's wounded, and I just wish everybody agreed with me all the time and saw things through my eyes. If they saw it through if
everything would be fixed,
right? If everybody knew what I knew, the world would be so much better. No, I mean, look, but for the grace of God, go I, right? And maybe I am there too. Like maybe it's me who's wrong. Maybe it's me who lives in a bubble. Maybe I watch only one news station, and that's why I think the way that I think, or something like that. So, I would encourage anybody who finds themselves just discouraged by that to just ask themselves, am I the victim of the very same thing? And if I hope that God forgives me for being myopic in my views or closed off to new ideas or whatever, that if God forgives me for those sins, let's also hope that God forgives anybody else who has the same problem, even if they're on the other side.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, and if you want to support the channel, visit patreon.com/Reason and Theology.